4. What a nice way to start our SEM, isn't it? So, before we begin the lecture, I call upon Mr. Kaviraj Nair, CEO, Office of Institutional Advancement, to please introduce our guest.
Good evening, everyone. It's such an honor to introduce Dr. Mohan. Every opportunity to interact with him is an honor, actually. So, just for the sake of for the sake of completeness, let me introduce him formally. Like though he's very well known to most of us and familiar in various circles. Dr. C. Mohan is currently a distinguished professor of science at Hong Kong Baptist University, a distinguished visiting professor at Tsinghua University in China, and a member of the inaugural Board of Governors of Digital University of Kerala. He retired in June 2020 from being an IBM Fellow at the IBM Almaden Research Center in Silicon Valley. He was an IBM researcher for 38.5 years in the database, blockchain, AI, and related areas, impacting numerous IBM and non-IBM products, the research and academic communities, and standards, especially with his invention of the well-known Aries family of database locking and recovery algorithms, and the presumed abort distributed commit protocol. This IBM, ACM, and IEEE Fellow has also served as the IBM India Chief Scientist. In addition to receiving the ACM Sigmod Edgar F. Codd Innovation Award, the VLDB 10-year Best Paper Award, and numerous IBM awards, Mohan was elected to the United States and Indian National Academies of Engineering and named an IBM Master Inventor. I think the list is pretty long, and I didn't know where to, where to reduce this, right? Like, so this distinguished alumnus of IIT Madras received his PhD at the University of Texas at Austin, and he's an inventor of 50 patents. During the last many years, during the recent years, he focused on blockchain, AI, big data, and cloud technologies. He was a Shaw visiting professor at the National University of Singapore during the first half of 2021. In 2019, he became an honorary advisor to the Tamil Nadu e-Governance Agency. In 2016, he became a distinguished visiting professor at China's prestigious Tsinghua University. And in 2023, he was named a distinguished professor of science at Hong Kong Baptist University. In 2021, he was inducted as a member of the inaugural Board of Governors of the Digital University of Kerala. Friends, the list is still incomplete, but I think I don't want to take time out of his talk. So look for a very warm welcome, Dr. Mohan, and we all look forward to a very interesting lecture from you.
Thank you, Kaviraj. Thank you so much. Sorry, it's a late evening kind of presentation, but I guess you guys know why you are doing this at this hour. But I've done one of these things before, but I don't know how long ago it was. So it's been a while since I came to the campus and gave an in-person talk. Let me see, because I'm not using my laptop. Okay. So this is a presentation I've given in a number of places, different countries and all that, but it started with IIT Hyderabad people in 2007 or 2008 asking me to speak to a bunch of undergrads. The idea being that the then director of IIT wanted these kids to get excited enough about research and such that they would at least do a master's, if not a PhD. That was the idea. Between third year and fourth year was when this annual event was held in Hyderabad. But since then, I've expanded the presentation, and people told me that they get some benefit out of listening to, the trials and tribulations of being successful. Of course, that itself is a question. What does success mean in one's career? So we'll talk about all that. The QR code on the left actually points to the link you see on the left, and the one on the right points to the link on the right. So if you get excited about any technical topic as opposed to more general stuff I'm going to talk about, you can go there and find, like Kaviraj said, various topics and details of all sorts of stuff. Of course, I'm a proud alumnus of this institution, so I'll say a bit about that also in one of the slides. How even though I was a chemical engineering guy, I wound up doing computer science after my BTech because there was no undergrad in CS anywhere in India at the time when I was finishing my BTech. It was 1977. I'm a really old guy. That's what that means. The other second URL is the one that is my homepage. The first one is actually a spreadsheet which has links to videos and PowerPoints and all sorts of stuff like that. So this is just to show you, over my career, which now is like 42 years since I finished my PhD in December 81, and 46 and a half years since I left this campus in June, 77. So there are actually 3 alumni here. Can somebody tell at least one of the 3 alumni who it is, other than me? IIT Madras alumni. So let's see whether, what does it do? Look at that. Does anyone recognize the gentleman with me? C.R. Muthukrishnan, who was one of the 2 professors, Mahabala and Muthu, who came from IIT Kanpur to set up the IIT Madras Computer Center in 1973, which was the beginning of my second year. The other one is the guy above. He did his MTech computer science here. He's a Microsoft fellow, and he has worked in different companies and all that. The third one is Vijay Shankar Raman. He was my colleague for quite a while. He is now in Google, and he got his PhD at Berkeley. So he's a pretty smart guy too. But Muthu, interestingly enough, is an alumnus as well as was a faculty member. He was in the 65 batch or something. He was a President's Gold Medalist, by the way. And then he went to Kanpur to get his PhD. Anyway, so if you're a database person, you'll recognize many other people here who are all well-known people in the community and such. So, and this black and white picture was taken about a year and a half after I joined IBM Research. And you'll hear about more of these sorts of things as time goes on. So caveats, I talk straight, I don't try to, be politically correct and not say certain things and all that. So you'll hear me, a guy who has never taken up management, sometimes management kind of people, not so much to really say you don't need managers or anything, but I want to encourage a lot more people to take up technical careers, long-term technical careers, individual contributor kind of roles. Because in India, it's become fashionable, you're a vegetable vendor to the mommy next door and so on, thinks that you haven't made it in life if you haven't become a manager. If the business card doesn't say the word manager, they think you're a loser. So all this kind of attitudinal changes are needed. And even people who talk about innovation, they talk in the abstract. Even, what's her name, the lady, the biotech lady in Bangalore, Kiran Mazumdar. She was about to get up on stage to give a talk on innovation in the IISc Centenary Conference. I had not met her until then. I quickly went to her before she got on stage and said, hey, don't just talk about innovation in the abstract. Talk about how it's important for long-term technical careers to be encouraged and celebrated, and not only talk about people who have made a ton of money, even, people who sell drugs make money, so that cannot be just the criterion for definition of success. So talk about, how it's important to celebrate and value technical contributors in companies and have a technical ladder and not just a management ladder. She didn't bother. She just talked about incremental innovation, revolutionary innovation, blah, 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 as if it's all some machine that will do all this without referring to individuals and how. Even other people, I tried to tell them, while I was based in Bangalore, that you guys, since you are India-based people, and I'm just here, for a few years, you should, this is even Narayana Murthy and so on, I'm now talking about mid-2000s to late 2000s. In your companies, you better, encourage technical ladders and have titles like fellow and so on. But they didn't do anything. And then you say, hey, we're not doing enough fundamental work. Yeah, because you're not encouraging it in a serious way. And not just writing papers, but actually producing stuff, running code, this, that, and so on. So Of course, life has been very different over the long period of time I've worked, and so your mileage might vary, and also it depends on your definition of success. So I tell people, it's for you as an individual to decide what success means, whether you make a lot of money, you provide employment, or you get fancy awards. In the US, typically people don't know each other's salaries. So in India, everybody discusses, again, the vegetable vendor to the milkman, and everybody knows your salary. And so that becomes the be all and end all. So if I want to prove that I'm smarter than Kaviraj, I find somebody who pays me more than he gets paid, and then we think that that means that I'm more successful or I'm a smarter person. All sorts of random nonsense is extrapolated from just this one thing. In a company like IBM, when I joined, in the research division, typically people who join as research staff members will have PhDs. The only promotion really, and by the way, becoming a manager is not considered a promotion, that you can get from RSM is to become a fellow, which is the highest technical position anywhere in IBM. The product organizations, as well as even in research, people with typically master's degrees, and they even started hiring people with bachelors, they'll have these leveled positions. Band 7, Band 8, blah, blah, blah. In India, they even introduced Band 7A, 7B in IBM, because in India, people seem to think that every year or so you deserve to be promoted, whether it means anything in the real sense or not. So they cooked up some of these additional stratification of this level business. And in China, I was told that they even changed the associate programmer, senior programmer, and all that. Those didn't sound sexy. So they came up with some fancier versions of this. This is like, in banks, they have assistant, vice president, and so on, some clerk that's dealing with you, because they want to make the customer also feel good that they're being dealt with by a person who has a VP somewhere there in that long-winded name. So, but, as a guy who was trying to not just publish papers and give talks outside, but also impact the bottom line of IBM, which is different from the way Xerox PARC and Bell Labs people operated. They couldn't care less about making money for their paymasters. They were happy contributing to the world, Unix or whatever kind of things, or GUI interface and things like that. And in the long run, that's not sustainable. And you also have to, feel, in a sense, obliged to make your ideas actually benefit the people who are paying your day in and day out salary and all that, right? So I was wanting to be known inside IBM as well as outside. But at the same time, I felt good that as a techie guy, I was getting enough respect and reasonable amount of money. Beyond a certain point, by the way, money is something you need to think carefully about. Yeah, having good amount of money lets you have a nice lifestyle, afford the housing costs in Silicon Valley and so on. But beyond a certain point, more money doesn't make you happier or anything. But I would rather, get kudos from well-respected people in the field than a few more bucks in my wallet after you've reached a certain level of comfort and this and that. So, so in that sense also, you have to decide, does, having $50 million in your bank account turn you on, or getting an IEEE fellow or this or that, or a Distinguished Alumnus Award and so on. Or a combination of the two, right? And providing jobs versus being an individual contributor. So starting companies. This is also confusion and casualness about startups means innovation, as if innovation doesn't happen in big companies, and also that all startups are innovating. Total BS, okay? So there are any number of Me Too companies. And the other thing is also, being eager to make money, or somehow whatever is the societally agreed upon definition of success, you are in a rush to get there. Give me a break. You have a long career, so you don't have to have the latest phone or the latest car and such ways of trying to show off that you are being successful. So as a RSM versus fellow, I was an RSM for 15 years. So some guy who just joined yesterday, he has the same title as I have. And since salaries are not known, there must be other ways in which I am recognized as a more senior person than this fresh kid of the university. So that's where all these other things begin to matter, the publications or the kinds of product impact you have had or the prototypes you have built and that are being used by other people and so on. So there are various such ways in which your picture shows up in the corridor because you did something that had a major impact on the external world or the internal world and such. So those then become more the focal point than this one thing called the salary. So of course the family also has to cooperate in various ways. They have their own share of things to deal with. And also this whole business of luxury versus economy, lifestyles and so on, you can do both. It's not like once you get used to going in business class, you can't travel in train or in economy and such things. So all of these sorts of things. So while I was here, as I said, there was no possibility of doing an undergrad in computer science anywhere in India. And at the beginning of my second year is when this IBM mainframe showed up. You know how much memory it had? 256K of memory. Okay, 2 years later it became 512K, and that was like a major leap for mankind. You still needed totally 1 meg of memory before you could run the interactive operating system called VMCMS. And until I left, they didn't have the money to buy that extra half a meg. And guess what? After I left, when they finally got the money, they couldn't even buy it anymore because core memory was no longer being made. They had switched over to DRAM and such things. So core memory, interestingly enough, is a non-volatile memory. Much later came all this NVM and all that, right? But the original core memory invented by J. Forrester at MIT was non-volatile. Even if the power is turned off, it will retain its contents. Not that too much use was made of that feature, but anyway, that was the part of it. So as an undergrad, thankfully, since IIT Madras gave us unlimited access to this machine. Of course, punch cards and 7-hour, 8-hour turnaround time between when you submit and when you get back a message saying, a printout saying, oh, syntax error, you forgot the semicolon and such nonsense. The kinds of things that the current generation just plays around with, we couldn't afford to. We had to be a lot more careful about what we did and so on. But as time went on and I used various packages and such, initially I got excited by application software, PERT, CPM, simulation, discrete event, continuous event, and so on. So I thought I'll do a PhD in computer science once I finish my BTech. But then there was a bug, some weird feature of this GPSS, discrete event simulation package. When I used it, it'll have an abnormal end, a bend as it was called, where you'll get a core dump. And I sat one summer of 75, in Vellore in my parents' place. Instead of going and having fun, I was disassembling, meaning going from machine code to manually assembler code, try to figure out the logic of this package where there were some calls where it will go from one place to some random place. It was actually doing an I/O, so it was getting into the operating system layer and all that. I became an expert in all these control blocks of the operating system, OS, VS1 as it was called, batch-oriented. That's when I said, it's for sissies to do all this management science PhD. Bare metal, close to the hardware kind of thing is what the right thing to do is, meaning computer science PhD rather than this application level stuff. So ultimately, in those days I had to handwrite letters and put them in the mailbox, and I used to walk up to the post office. I don't know whether it's still there in the campus. Put stamp and all that, handwrite the letters and so on, to get on the mailing list of Berkeley and even the lab that I ultimately joined, IBM Research in San Jose. So I had all these research reports on computer science. My discipline was chemical, mind you. My parents thought I was going to flunk my chemical because I was spending my spare time and more at the computer center, and I came to be called Computer Mohan. The C. Mohan became Computer Mohan and so on. But there was this computer club. There was a guy who was 1 year senior to me, HR Mohan. He was the president one time. I was the secretary. And then when he graduated, I became the president of the computer club. So we used to have some outside normal channels, those talks. And I would also go and sit in on some of the MTech classes, computer science. And the guys used to say, why is this BTech chemical guy coming and asking more questions than we ourselves are, excited about and such. Mahabala even said, why aren't you sitting in chemical and doing your stuff? Muthu and Nagarajan encouraged my craziness. Muthu actually wound up being this is C.R. Muthukrishnan. He wound up being my BTech project guide. They allowed me to do it in computer science. So the sad thing was, after all the stuff I had done and written to various people, and they even sent me PhD theses to study and such, thinking I'll get prepared for my PhD in computer science, nobody gave me a full-blown assistantship. I went to UT Austin without any assistantship, although I got it in Nebraska, partial aid. I thought UT Austin was a better place than University of Nebraska. Although Anandan went there, by the way. He got his master's at Anandan is the guy who started Microsoft Research in India. But after finishing my PhD qualifier and all that fast, I had trouble finding a thesis topic. I also had to switch advisors and all that, including this IIT Madras PGM, Mani Chandy, who got a PhD in OR from MIT after his BTech here. So I thought maybe working in Europe, because it was more painful to get a job in the US in those days as a student visa holder. So I actually spent 2 summers in Europe thinking maybe, that way I'll maybe find a problem that's more interesting through these outside channels than in a university atmosphere. And I also, outside of my thesis, did some stuff which later on helped me a lot. This critical report I wrote on a system about which tons of papers had been published, and the people who worked on it were considered big deal and so on. Both the hardcore people working on it as well as consultants from Harvard, Phil Bernstein and Christos Papadimitriou, who some of you might have heard of as a theory guy. He actually worked on some real system in a more theoretical bent than really practical. So I ripped it apart as a PhD student, even though nobody wanted to get that paper published in any real places because they were unhappy that here was this no-name grad student coming and ripping apart this, which had been published in many conferences as well as journals and so on. But it's this kind of stuff that I'm going to tell you later on. You need to have the guts to sometimes go against the flow and question the traditional wisdom or the gray-haired guy telling you some things. Don't take everything I say at face value, because I did this to other people, where I didn't want to take some strongly worded statements or loudly said things as gospel truth and just merely follow the orders kind of thing. I questioned them and asked them to rationalize whatever they were claiming was the right approach in contrast to some other approach and such. So while graduating finally with this Avi Silberschatz, who I said was also the PhD advisor of another IIT Madras alumnus, Raghu Ramakrishnan, I had not done any practical work as part of the thesis itself. Even though he was a systems guy, he wasn't into building actually systems. He had an operating system book and a database systems book, Silberschatz. But as part of his research work, he didn't build anything. And so I felt I didn't know enough about real systems. And by the way, weirdly enough, in UT Austin, I had no access to any IBM machines. So for about 4.5 years, from fall of 77 to fall of 81, I was completely away from any IBM machines, in contrast to what I did here for 4 years. So I said I'm only going to apply to industrial research places. Even as a fallback option, I'm not going to apply to academia, because I said I really need to get my hands dirty and get to know about real systems. So luckily for me, because of that SDD1 work, the critical report I wrote, more so than my PhD thesis work, I got a job in the mecca of database research as of that time, because that's where relational databases came from. The SQL language came from the same team that I joined a little later than the initial work. Ted Card, the father of relational, was my colleague for 2 years. he was not a practical guy. He just wrote the papers and came up with the model. But the people who did the practical work, one of them, the lady who is considered the mother of cost-based query optimization, Pat Selinger, she was my first manager. She hired me. And it turned out later on, a whole bunch of people that had worked on that R-Star project, which was a distributed database version of the original System R project, in the context of which SQL was developed. She founded that project, and I joined that project midway through its lifespan. And so one of the things that you said that became an international standard and so on is this presumed abort commit protocol. That was the first piece of work where this other gray-haired guy said, "Oh, Mohan, I've looked at presumed abort and presumed commit. The right thing is presumed commit." But he had only looked at the messaging costs and had not looked at the logging aspects, when to write log records, when log records should be flushed to stable storage and such things. I said, look, I'm going to do the full job and then figure out by comparing the two approaches which is the better approach. And it turned out his intuition was wrong. Presumed abort in most cases is better than presumed commit. And that's the thing that became an international standard. And other companies actually commercially exploited it even before IBM commercially exploited it. But apart from the fact that some of us became IBM fellows, the more interesting thing for me was right around me were all these famous people, Backus being the father of Fortran, who got the Turing Award, right? So he was there. Some of these other guys, Fagin and Pippinger, are well-known theoreticians. Nick's class, Nick Pippinger, it's a complexity class for parallel programs. That's the guy. His wife also was in IBM Almaden, Maria Clave, who later on became ACM president, and she was dean of engineering at Princeton, head of computer science at University of British Columbia, and later on she became the president of Harvey Mudd College in Southern California and so on, a very highly respected person. So nobody had to talk to us in a formal way, HR people coming and talking about technical ladder, this, that, because I had all these people that I day in and day out was meeting and having coffee with or lunch with and such. Whereas when I came to India later, I had to learn about various things because in India, people on a regular basis didn't have enough senior technical people to interact with. So they had to be told. There are jokers like me who remained, techies forever without becoming a manager, and still the CEO of the company knew who I was. See, this is the other problem. People think that only if you move up the management chain that you'll have visibility. But again, that's the problem with the companies which think that way. If you respect the contributions of techies, then the technical ladder people should also be equally celebrated within the company, as well as I used to tell the press people. How often do you guys write about C.N.R. Rao and such people, or other people in non-university kind of establishments? You only talk about Chris Gopalakrishnan and Nandan Nilekani and all these other guys, or some guy in the more recent past that are startup guys. Whether they actually, in a long-term sense, have any viable thing or not, just because they are considered to be, what do they call them? The billion-dollar unicorns. Suddenly, they are declared to be successes even before anything comes out or they make a dime of profit. So it's all wrong ways of looking at things, and I wish things will change. And of course, when people get laid off and all that, suddenly people become more careful about who they work for, not just based on the money, but the long-term viability of the organization and such things. And by the way, I've lived in Silicon Valley for 42 years, so I've seen all this kind of nonsense day in and day out happening over there. People just jumping ship from one company to another at the drop of a hat and such. So this is not just a statement about India. So it turned out at the end of this R-Star project, we started a new project. The whole idea was, it was called Starburst, to try to learn from the past experience of not just IBMers, but also other company people in the database field. So the notion of extensibility, client server and such, long before cloud and such came, right? At that time, I said, there have been some remaining open problems from the original System R days, even before R-Star, right? That some of the things they did for recovery and such, or concurrency control, were not good enough. And some of the people that worked on that stuff had given up on trying to come up with anything better because they had a certain mindset with which they looked at things. And I, as a non-System R guy, decided I'm going to dig through that and in the context of this new project, re-examine all that. But some people were questioning me. This is what's wrong with Mohan, because the whole world has moved on. This is not the currently hot topic, concurrency, recovery, and so on. It's something else, extensibility, XML, whatever, right? This is where, again, you have to have the mental strength or whatever to persist on something. Of course, if you keep persisting on trying to prove P equals NP for your entire career, you're going to be ignored, basically, unless somehow, at the end of 30 years of working on it, you produce something. In the meantime, you might have to be begging and so on because your employer might not pay you for spending all your time on only that thing, right? If you have other things also happening on the side, that's okay. So I had to dig through a lot of the original 15 years ago kind of thing as of that point and find even bugs, conceptual bugs, not some silly programming bug and such. So I had a tough time getting my papers published and such because people thought I was barking up the wrong tree, both IBMers and people in the research community outside, universities as well as other company people and all that. So sometimes just letting the whole world know about what are the remaining problems to be solved, or what was thought to be a solved problem is not really actually addressing the whole gamut of stuff that needs to be addressed in a really, working system and that handles all sorts of cases. Here again, I want to needle the startup kind of people. They do something Mickey Mouse-ish, demoable stuff that only is demoware, and then they think that they have solved all the problem. They con people into giving them money to either do the, going and becoming public, or they find some bigger company like IBM or some other company acquiring them, and then they laugh their way to the bank. The first set of people who worked on it. It's the next set of people who have to deal with this thing that they have created that will, in order to make it really a practical system and all that, worry about all the fringe cases, scale it up and all that, right? The ones where you might have even ignored certain security issues and such, or you can't deal with certain availability requirements and such. And that's when people then say, oh God, what is this? Why did I buy into this? Either as a company that went public, I bought the shares, or I bought the company itself, and the bigger company says, oh, what a mess. And then after a while, they ignore it. So it's these sorts of things that you need to watch out for. And so it's along those lines that I had a bunch of stuff. I won't go through all this kind of detailed stuff. How am I doing with time? 7:10. Okay. So ultimately, it turned out working with the product guy and understanding what customers' real problems were, as opposed to just being an ivory tower researcher, resulted in a minor modification, but that was revolutionary in terms of its capabilities. That's this Aries recovery scheme. The guys in my own lab were saying, why are you wasting your time talking to these product guys? Or do they know? Sometimes it's an attitudinal issue. Just because I have a PhD next to my name, by definition, I must be smarter than these guys who might have only a bachelor's possibly, or even if they have a master's. So you have to have the sort of personality to discuss with people in a way where you don't sort of try to make them look like they are nobody and such. You have to get the value out of them for what they are exposed to and such, in terms of real customer situations where existing products, features are not good enough and such. This was at a time when in IBM research labs, we didn't have customer briefing centers and such. So we had to actually go to the product lab to even hear customer stories and such. The world has changed a lot, of course. Now, even in the research labs, there are customer briefing centers and customers directly visit the research lab and stuff like that. So this successful thing that I managed to do with the product architect of the DB2 product on the mainframe resulted in the establishment of something called Database Technology Institute as a way of encouraging more regular interactions on an ongoing basis. Don't wait till you invent something and prototype it and then throw it over the wall and try to make the product guys now take your prototype and turn it into a product. early on engagement with the product people will make them also be part of the solution, so they'll have a vested interest in making that thing becoming successful. So there's always this thing, where you want to claim sole ownership or, creativity, or maybe a small number of you because you think that makes you look cooler than involving these other people, in which by definition might result in the paper having 5 authors instead of having only 2 authors and things like that. But if you really want to define success as something that doesn't just stop at writing papers, but actually this technology being incorporated in various systems and that those systems becoming successful in a long-term sense, not just declare success the minute your company goes public and then you don't give a damn about whether that company lasts 3 more years or 30 more years and such. So for all of those sorts of ways of looking at things, it's better to engage with people who have more practical exposure. And I'm not only talking about now research ideas, but even product development. Way too often, Indian locations of various foreign companies are merely doing the programming work, not enough of component ownership, let alone whole product ownership. Ultimately, we need to get to that point. If you look at the Chinese guys, you look at Baidu, Huawei, Tencent, Alibaba, and so on, and I know quite a lot about these guys. They are not only producing products, full-blown products, out of their own country. They do have locations elsewhere and all that they are trying to leverage. But they are also equally well writing papers, not just in the industry tracks of conferences, but even in the research tracks. So we are nowhere there in India now, talking in a parochial sense about Indian companies and what they are doing. Yeah, you have flash in the pan kind of some little startups doing a few things, but for the scale of the population, 1 billion people each between China and here, we are way behind. By the way, in terms of Turing Awards also, interestingly enough, we are all 1 billion plus. We have 1 each between China and India. Raj Reddy is the only guy who has gotten the Turing Award, which is the highest honor in computer science, like Sangeeta Kalanidhi for persons who are into Carnatic music, like Music Academy dishes out every year, or if you want to think about Nobel Prizes, it's considered like the Nobel Prize for computer science, informally, since there is no Nobel Prize for computer science. There are only 1, and in the case of China, it's Andy Yao. He's not even from originally mainland China. He lived for a long time in Taiwan and then moved to the US, but he's now become a Chinese citizen, giving up his US citizenship. So this Aries stuff wound up having impact not just on IBM prototypes and products, but also other companies' products and university prototypes and things like that. So here I list a whole bunch of things about, how sheep mentality that, at some point somebody declares, oh, JSON is a hot thing, or document database is a hot thing, or cloud database is a hot thing. And then everybody and his uncle wants to work on that thing because they want to feel, they want to belong. But there's also this notion that if you become an expert in something, you continue to work on it. This is called the polishing the round ball. It's easier to do incremental work than to go stick your neck out and go into a new topic, for you at least, new topic, because you have to do some groundwork to get to speed in that area. And also a lot of times people think by just merely using some new terminology, they are off the hook with respect to learning about what has gone on for decades in some topic which might be called by a different name. Even virtual memory, a lot of people think, VMware invented virtual memory. Nothing can be farther from truth. IBM did it decades ago, right? So JSON is not all that different from XML, but just because it's JSON, people think they can ignore all the XML work that had been done before. On and on. Even cloud database systems, yeah, there are many differences in the cloud context, but it's not like all the non-cloud on-prem databases are totally to be ignored. So it's in that sense also, you have to do your homework, and you will be better off by doing some of that homework, because what you don't know, and as a result, you may not even know what are all the problems to be solved. You might at some point declare victory in terms of solving all the problems, but in fact, you haven't. So I had to do a lot of evangelization. I volunteered. I actually sent papers to people who I thought should know about them instead of waiting for them to ask for my papers or on their own find out about them. This is like evangelization, marketing your work. Yeah, you might think, oh, my traditional tata party, grandparents and so on told me, sit in your corner, do good work, and glory should come to you rather than you should seek it. Forget it. In this dog eats dog world, you have to sell your ideas too, and that requires a lot of soft skills and everything. It's not enough to be a smart person. And also, if you are just using your smartness to find fault in other people's work, that's not good enough also. You have to synthesize things too. You have to create stuff. There are any number of people who are good at knowing a lot and using that knowledge to find fault with others, but they themselves don't create anything. So that's also bad. So even if you stay technical, but only do this role of finding fault, that's not good. So there are many things like that. It's easy to get new technology into a brand new product, but incorporating new technology into an existing product requires a lot more work, because now you have to understand how the existing thing works. By the way, in the big data space and so on, NoSQL space, gazillion products have been created or prototypes have been built or open source things have been done. A lot of times, the people who did some of these new things didn't want to spend their time or waste their time looking into the existing things to see which comes closest to what they think are the requirements they have to meet and tweak it, because then they say, oh, I have to understand that maybe the person who wrote this system before didn't document it properly and so on. Guess what? This person, as a result, winds up building a new thing, and they do an equally bad job of documenting their thing. So there is a proliferation of non-standard based APIs and such. It's a royal mess if you go look at some of my other presentations about the state of affairs. So I managed to, ever so slowly go impact products in the IBM sphere in various locations. But it's not like everything was successful that I touched. There were other situations where outsiders thought I had succeeded, but in fact, I felt very bad because maybe I wrote a few papers, but it didn't go anywhere in terms of commercialization and being incorporated in IBM products and such. So I don't have the time to go into all these details, but so there were lots of awards and so on. I'll let you look at these slides later on and you'll find out more. And also Kaviraj mentioned a bunch of these things. But look at this. At the end of my IBM India tenure as the IBM India chief scientist, which was from June 2006 to January 2009, for about 6 months, my second line manager, my manager's manager, was the CEO of IBM. And mind you, I still had never been a manager and so on. So, and at that time, IBM was like $100 billion revenue kind of company. So, so this is a list of things that I've already told you about. Also, don't hesitate to complain. At least in the US environment, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So if you don't raise certain concerns about not getting enough recognition, this, that, people will ramrod their way through and not give you credit. So you also have to be vocal enough to get recognized and so on, however the recognition comes, awards or promotions or whatever. And don't look for quick return on investment. It might excite you to begin with, but that might become a short-lived thing. And so I used to say during my India tenure, why is it that the youngsters think they should have the latest car, latest phone, and this and that, and hence their whole attitude about what jobs they look for gets, messed up, and they don't work on stuff that says long-term things. Even people who remain technical, way too often they think by jumping from one topic to another, have more acronyms in their resume. Somehow they are like jack of all trade, but they don't realize they won't be master of any of it. That's also a bad thing. You have to stay in one area long enough to really internalize what the different issues are and so on before you can contribute a serious amount of innovative work rather than mundane programming. And I'm not even referring to research here. Even for product kind of ideas, you have to do the intense way of looking at it over a prolonged period of time. And also don't get carried away with number of papers and so on. Quality is also equally important. This is why in many universities and such, they'll say, tell me what are your best 5 papers. Don't give me the whole bloody list. And let's see, how much citations or whatever. If that's one metric, another metric is, what did you work on that you prototyped and then it got picked up, GitHub, this, that, or downloaded by others. Even if you don't open source it, are other people using it if you make it available and such. So I also on that count want to see the major change in the Indian universities and various places like that as to how much of this kind of thing happens. So it's biodata. This is the last thing I showed on my last day at IBM. IBM. They used to have just the letter M. I said I had worked in IBM for about 1/3 of its life, so I deserve one letter, I said. It's just a joke. But so after a few months after my retirement in June 2020, I got asked by that Hanuma Kodavalla, the ex-IIT Madras guy, who's a fellow in Microsoft, whether I would consider consulting for Microsoft. He thought I might have a problem because I had been an IBMer for so long. This is like going to the evil empire kind of thing. I said, no, this is the sort of thing I wanted to do, because when I retired, the idea was not to just forget about computer science and go off and do totally different things, but to be able to do things that I couldn't do as a full-time employee of IBM. I wanted to still stay technical. So I talked about some of these sorts of things, and I was so excited because by the time I was thinking about possibly retiring, IBM had stopped even talking about databases and such, even though IBM invented relational. Just like we invented RISC technology, but IBM didn't make it commercial until after Berkeley and Stanford and MIPS and Sun kind of people started making money. Just like in the case of relational, Oracle came out with a product before IBM chose to commercialize it, because it's this why rock the boat, the so-called innovator's dilemma that you might have heard about. When the previous generation of stuff like mainframes or pre-relational database systems were doing well, why introduce this new thing and then having to tell customers when to use the old thing versus the new thing? So I was quite appreciative of the fact that Microsoft guys were still doing a lot of hardcore, nuts and bolts kind of database work, not just high-level fluffy data science and AI and so on, but even my kind of things, which is like low-level concurrency, recovery, indexing, and storage management and such. And so that was good. But I've been keeping myself busy since then. As was mentioned, I spent a semester doing a seminar course at NUS. That was a paid thing, whereas some of these other positions I have are honorary positions, Tsinghua as well as Hong Kong Baptist University. So when I came back from Singapore after a semester there, about a few months after that, Google guys said, how about consulting part-time? Actually, one of the alumni of IIT Madras, Shiv Venkatraman, who has been in Google for a while, he asked me to consult on blockchain, and then later the Google Cloud people got wind of the fact that I was consulting for Google, and then they wanted me to also consult on database things. So for about 10 months, and then they told me we are tightening our belt. This was December 2022. I had no idea come January they were going to lay off 12,000 people, right? So whenever the companies tighten their belt, the first ones to get affected are the contractor or consultant types. So I'm still waiting to see when they're going to not anymore be tightening their belt and loosening their belt. So I've also had these other things that were mentioned. And I'm still involved very much in technical conferences, being program check, whatever, being a program committee member and such things. And I even managed to write a paper with the Google guys on a document database system called Firestore. That's it. So, any questions, comments, criticisms, brickbats? Yeah.
Sir, actually, I have two questions. So the first is, when I speak to some of the older alumni as to why they went to the US, they say that because India back then did not have many opportunities
Right.
Like, it was kind of constrained, so you had to go to the US. But sir, now things have definitely changed and evolved. So, if given a chance, would you consider doing your PhD or your post-graduation in India?
Good question. So, if it's specifically about computer science, I can say more than with respect to other topics. I'm still not happy, as I said, about the level of involvement of faculty with respect to more practical things, amount of prototyping that's done, big projects. So one of the complaints I had in the IISc Centenary Conference, when I was asked to get on stage as part of a panel on the future directions of the Electrical Sciences Division, even though I was not an alumnus, I was still asked to do this by the Dean of Electrical Sciences Division, who later became the director of IISc. I said in Berkeley, MIT, Stanford, and so on, professors get together with their underlings and do joint projects. Rarely has that sort of thing been observed. At least this was even more true back in 2008. So the problem with that is you don't have critical mass of people to work on a big systems project. I'm now talking about systems project rather than theoretical stuff where you write papers, you can be a onesie person doing it. So unless you build these big systems, prototypes, and then based on that, products being developed. If you look at Mike Stonebreaker, who was the fourth guy to get the Turing Award for databases, every one of his research projects, he turned it into a product. Starting from Ingress days, System R was being done at IBM in parallel at UC Berkeley. Mike Stonebreaker and company were doing Ingress, which based on the same model had a different query language called Quell. But in the end, the standard things was won by SQL. So in terms of number of people going for PhDs, the number is small. So my friend Jayant Haritsa and others who have managed to keep up with the people in America in terms of publications, they themselves had to do a lot of the work which in the West, a lot of times the students would do. So the number of people doing PhDs is a lot smaller, and MTech students are not good enough to, in a long-term sense, have continuity and all that to work on bigger projects that involve a longer time than some Mickey Mouse prototype being done. So for all of these sorts of reasons, the ecosystem is still not where I would like it to be. And in that sense also, China is in a far better position. And yeah, at the time I did my things, I couldn't have come back to India after my PhD because I wanted to be in industrial research, as I said. There wasn't a single research lab in India in the computer science field. Much later came IBM Research. As I said, my IIT classmate, Anand, then started Microsoft Research. And then Bell Labs Research also got started by another IIT alumnus, but my academic sibling from UT Austin, Rajiv Rastogi. So there is a lot more to be accomplished, is the bottom line. And so now it's a question of, are you interested in academic positions or research positions or product development? Depending on that, again, the answers can be somewhat different. But clearly the scope is much better now than 42 years ago when I finished my PhD. There's no...
Still come back to India and set up your own now? You still did that, then you came back to India and became a faculty at one of the institutes.
No, I haven't become a faculty.
I mean, you were associated with a university in Kerala, so...
No, see, I'm on the board of governors of that thing. I'm not a faculty member. Also, it's one thing to be a regular faculty member and being a visiting professor and so on, honorary kind of position, which is what I have in Tsinghua University and Hong Kong Baptist University. So, I mean, I was asked to even teach a course in Stanford and so on, but I didn't feel like it because I knew that it's a lot of work to prepare basic slides on transaction processing and set up quiz and this and that. And I was having enough fun as an industrial researcher. I didn't feel like spending my time because, you know, Hector Garcia Molina said, I'm tired of teaching the transaction processing course at Stanford. How about you coming and doing it at least one semester? And I love giving talks, but not the very basic things and having to deal with grading and all this kind of stuff. So that's the reason even at NUS, I did only a seminar course for one semester on topics in databases, blockchain, and so on.
So I had one.
Oh yeah, one more.
Sorry to take the time. But, so the other question that I had was, so even among the US universities, how do you think these universities compare among each other? I'm not talking about an undergrad.
There are same problems there too. There are many universities which don't have enough resources and don't have the kind of groups that MIT, Berkeley, Wisconsin.
Okay, I'm going to take a specific example because I'm going to New York University for the summer.
NYU.
Yeah, NYU for the summer. But so should I still, I mean, obviously I should still look for the possibilities in these universities. Like,
So are you going to the Brooklyn campus or the?
Yeah.
Okay, so see, that was originally Brooklyn Polytechnic, which NYU acquired to, because they didn't have an engineering school to begin with. So they do very practical things. Julian Freire is a database person. She moved from Utah to, so I've even given a talk in her big data class and things like that. So they even do some very practical things with the city of New York. So urban, blah, 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 they do stuff. So there are places in the US which are better off than other places. And so, yeah, you can claim you got a degree from some US university, but without knowing which university that is, that doesn't immediately make me get excited or anything by any means. In fact, there are a lot of people from India send their kids to America for undergrad, and I'm like, don't think that just because some random university in America is going to grant your child a bachelor's, that means that that child is better than some child which went to an IIT or NIT or whatever kind of places.
So would you say that for NYU, would you say that for the engineering school at NYU too, like is it comparable to some of the other schools? Because I was hoping, are you even planning to sort of apply as a postgrad?
Yeah, I mean, they are in definitely better position than all sorts of other no-name universities in the heart of America and so on. So, but now you have to look at specifically, what area interests you and who the people are that are in that area and so on.
I'm from
so,
physics for the context. So
okay.
I'll be looking for.
Okay. So, any other questions? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay, next.
Good evening, sir. Thanks. My name is Arjit. So, as you talk about layoff, and we are seeing the layoff from various type of ages, like from starting from fresher to people who have been working in Google for the last 19 years.
Right.
And the people who have worked in Google for last 19 years must be very good as compared to other people in technical.
Okay, stop right there. So I had a point here about even product people should give presentations, blah, blah, blah. I invite you to go look at my spreadsheet. There are any number of presentations there about the state of the data landscape, trends and directions, and so on, where I specifically address this point. I was flabbergasted when I went to Google and found there are any number of people who are in some big deal muck within Google, but when I tried to find out what their claim to fame is, I couldn't find anything. Even Google fellows, some of them, even some of our own, my own colleagues who went there, even an IIT Madras alumnus, I'll give you the name separately because it's all being recorded. He went there and it was like a black hole. Next thing I know, after some number of years, that he became a Google fellow. I still can't figure out what his claim to fame is. So, a lot of these people, so I gave a talk at the request of Google guys for in an internal conference in June last year. No, not last year, the year before, sorry. I'm losing track. 2022. And I told them, look guys, for a long time you've been building all sorts of middleware where the users were the captive audience, namely the product areas within Google, whether it's Chrome or YouTube or ads or search and on, Android and so on. So in many ways, they could get away with murder in the sense that until some of this middleware got exposed through Google Cloud, where they chose to take a subset of these things and put them out there to try to make money with people outside of Google, which is when, for the first time, the rest of the world could play with these things. and do comparisons. Now comes various metrics along which they could get potentially nailed because they don't measure up: price, performance, standards compliance, availability of an ecosystem, this, that, and so on. How many papers were written that other people even care to check out their thing, compared to even Amazon guys writing papers on Aurora and so on. And of course, Microsoft product people have been writing papers for a long time. So there are various ways in which suddenly some successful people who didn't care to have any presence in social media and so on, even LinkedIn and such, suddenly lost their jobs. And now what are they going to tell the rest of the world? Oh, just believe the fact that I had this level position in Google as proof that I'm a smart person. No, I want to have independent way of looking at what did you do, and what was your claim to fame. Even for IEEE fellow, this, that, they expect you to get reference letters from people outside of your own organization. And I'm not going to just say, oh, this guy is a Google fellow and hence he deserves to become a National Academy of Engineering member or become an IEEE fellow. I want to know the details of what exactly was the technical stuff that that person did. So it's along those lines also. It's in your own self-interest, but in the case of this Google Cloud kind of thing, for the organization to be looked up to as a possible supplier of fancy data warehousing thing or AI thing or whatever, the visibility of the people behind it matters. Even if personally they don't give a damn about being visible, as representatives of the organization, they should care. And if not, the management should nail them. It cannot be, oh, I don't like giving talks, so don't bother me. Hey, it's no longer like your own personal choice that matters, because I know a lot about some of the Amazon products because there are people like even my former colleague Sailesh Krishnamurthy came and gave talks at ACM Sigmod and VLDV conference and things like that. Yeah. Thank you.
Around industry research. What are your thoughts around why industry people, particularly in India, are not publishing research papers? And what do you think would motivate or other perhaps enable them to
for the
publish?
longest time, it was this question of low-hanging fruit, right? I used to argue even in IBM India to the IBM services people, hey guys, don't keep thinking that forever this Kamadhenu or whatever will keep giving milk, because just like these things came to India during Y2K and so on, they could equally easily go out of India when Vietnam and Philippines and China and all those sorts of places get their act together with respect to English speaking abilities and such. These low-level coolie IT kind of jobs can equally disappear. But see, again, if people are being evaluated on the short-term thing, how much money did you bring in this latest quarter and such, which is the problem even in the US, right? The Wall Street guys breathing down your neck. Why did 12,000 people get laid off? Not because they were having losses in Google. They're still making tens of billions of dollars profit, mind you, right? Because they're being measured on how much increase in their profits is happening from quarter to quarter and a comparison with last year and so on. So people want to take the easy way out, especially senior executives. And this is where, in addition to saying 70 hours of work should be done each week and stuff like that, I wish he had listened to me, back in 2007, 2008, when I said, you guys should create a technical ladder and talk about technical people rather than just talking about management types. If there isn't enough of this kind of, I was even asked to speak at the first ever architects conference in Wipro, because they were beginning to think, oh, maybe I should do something. But even in a big company like IBM, there was a notion of a difference between IBM India versus IBM in the Western countries especially. And I used to say this to even people in other developing countries, that they all have to change their mentality and not have this old world mentality of sitting in your corner and doing good work and then thinking everything will happen magically after that. because you deserve. You know, sometimes these companies give the same project to two different countries and then appoint somebody to be the judge as to which of the two is the best one. Our guys will say it's the judge's problem that that judge didn't spend enough time understanding what I produced. I've already convinced two guys around me that this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. But it's now up to the judge to do the homework to figure this out. Whereas the guys in America might have done itsy bitsy stuff, but they talk a lot about it. And then you say, oh, this judge is a fool that he fell for that kind of thing. So if you are really so sure that what you have done is good, you'd better come through in the way you present it and, you know, evangelize it and such. So that's why I say I had to act like a manager, even though I've never been a manager, in the sense of talking about the work, not waiting for others to ask me for the papers and all that, but stick it under their nose and so on. So I think this whole product mentality, we have had product conclave and all that. I was part of one of these things when Ashish Gupta, who is a smart guy, he was behind Jungli, one of the founders. He was a President's Gold Medalist, I think, from IIT Kanpur or Delhi, I forget now. When he was in Bangalore and I was living in Bangalore, they even made me take part in some of these sorts of things. But even in Bangalore, you know, I went to some NASCOM conclave or whatever to find out that right in my backyard, some fancy stuff was being done with some, you know, how to use mobile phones or something in really cold climate where the keys better not be tiny because you are wearing your gloves and you are trying to touch some. But these are again flashes in the pan. But in a bigger sense, for the size of the IT population, the amount of focus on doing product development as opposed to all these services companies doing turnkey projects, time and material. Sometimes they don't even use certain things because then it'll happen faster and then they can't charge as much. And by the way, I've heard such stories about even some company that I won't name now, where by doing something the hard way rather than using something and doing it faster, the guys think, it seems, guys meaning girls also, at the end of the year, I can't legitimately tell my manager, it took me 100 hours to do this rather than only 10 hours, because the manager will think 100-hour investment is like really hard work, whereas if the person had used some high-level tool, so this is the kind of crap that goes on with even NoSQL and such low-level APIs, even MapReduce and such becoming popular when in fact some of us had spent decades working on why high-level things are good and declarative is better than imperative programming and such. As I was asked to give a talk at UC Santa Cruz, can India be an innovation superpower? This happened during 2008, 2009. I listed a whole bunch of these sorts of things. Even when Department of Science and Technology has some funds for individual innovators to prototype their thing and try to make it successful, there weren't enough takers in India at the time. There was even a program of the DST for women who went out of the workforce because of kids or whatever kind of issues. They wanted to bring them back later on. The only thing was that you had to attach yourself to some lab or the other. You didn't have to become an employee of the lab owning organization, but there were not enough takers. This was like 50 plus women who were being encouraged to, and I found out about this in the Indian Science Congress in 2008, I think. So money is no longer a problem. It's this mentality of, do I want to take on product development? Because then you have to know about requirements and all that yourself rather than, like in the case of all these TCS and Infosys and all these kinds of things, somebody hands you all that and says, who's the cheapest one to implement this turnkey thing? Sorry, I go on a rant like this when these are topics I've been, passionate about for a long, long time, but not enough takers to do something about these things. Any other questions, or you guys want to go home and have lunch, dinner? That's it. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
I invite Ma'am. I invite Mr. Kaviraj Nair, CEO Office of Institutional Advancement, onto stage to felicitate Dr. C. Mohan.
Hello. Yeah, I think. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mohan. It was such an insightful conversation. Started off on a very personal note, talking about his early years at IIT and the universities, and then he went around a lot of topics, right? And talked to us about some really sharp insights and like precise, clear views formed through several decades of experience, right? And he very decisive views about various aspects. It's wonderful listening to you. Thank you so much for that very insightful discussion. As I keep mentioning, this is the best thing about IIT Madras student life, that they get opportunity to listen to some really top class, world class veterans and doyens in their respective fields. This kind of an opportunity doesn't really come through easily if you're outside, if you're living outside IIT Madras campus. Trust me on that. So let's express our sincere gratitude to Dr. Mohan for this wonderful evening and the session. As a token of our appreciation, we would like to present you with a small memento.
Ladies and gentlemen, as all good things must come to an end, it seems we have reached ours. On behalf of the ACR office and the Alumni Relations Cell, I would like to extend our sincere gratitude to Dr. C. Mohan for taking time to share his valuable insight with us today. Your presence and words have truly inspired us, sir. I would also like to thank Dr. Mahesh, Dean ACR, for endowing his valuable support towards the team and for the event. Last but not the least, I would also like to express my gratitude to the wonderful audience for their participation and interaction. Thank you for coming.